It was a warm June evening in Charleston, South Carolina, when a frantic 911 call shattered the calm. A fire was raging at the sofa superstore, and within minutes, brave firefighters charged into the inferno. But what began as a routine response turned into a heart-wrenching tragedy, claiming 9 heroes in the deadliest firefighting disaster since 9/11. This is their story, a firefighter tribute to courage, sacrifice, and a night that changed a city forever. Stay with me, because you won't believe how it unfolds. Welcome to the Firefighter Tribute channel. Before we dive deeper into this story, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Where are you tuning in from? Share your thoughts or a story about the firefighters who've touched your life. If these stories resonate with you, hit that subscribe button to support the channel and join us in celebrating the inspiring tales of firefighters everywhere. My name is Henry Carter, but folks around Charleston always call me Hank. I'm 72 now, sitting here in my old rocking chair, looking out over the low country where the marshes meet the sky. Back in my day, I was a firefighter with the Charleston Fire Department, and I saw a lot in my 30 years on the job. But there's one night I'll never forget, a night that changed our city forever. It was June 18, 2007, a warm Monday evening, and a fire broke out at the Sofa Superstore on Savannah Highway. That fire took 9 of our brothers, 9 of the bravest men I ever knew. It was the deadliest firefighting disaster since the towers fell on 9/11. I'm going to tell you their story not just because it hurts to remember, but because it matters to keep their memory alive. Let me take you back to Charleston in 2007. It was a city of cobblestone streets and church steeples where folks waved to each other on the porch and knew their neighbors by name. The fire department was the heartbeat of our town. We had 237 firefighters spread across 19 companies, and we were a family. We'd spend 24-hour shifts together, eating meals, sharing stories, and waiting for the bell to ring. Those stations were our second homes. I can still smell the coffee brewing in the kitchen and hear the laughter around the table. We'd talk about our kids, our wives, our dreams. But when that alarm sounded, we'd drop everything and run to the trucks, ready to face whatever was waiting. Among us were men like Louis Mulkey. Louis was 34, a firefighter with Engine 11, but also a high school teacher and coach. He'd spend his days teaching kids history and his evenings teaching them how to throw a curveball. He had a smile that lit up a room and a heart that never quit. Then there was Michael French, just 27, one of the young bucks at Ladder 5. Mike was full of fire, always the first to volunteer for a tough job, dreaming of making captain one day. And James Drayton, we called him Earl, was 56, a veteran who'd seen it all. Earl had fought in Vietnam before joining the department, and his stories kept us glued to our seats. These men and the others we lost were the kind of folks you'd want by your side in a storm. I knew their families too. Take Margaret Thompson, Maggie, the wife of Brandon Thompson, one of our boys at Engine 16. Maggie was a school teacher, always baking cookies for the station. But every time Brandon left for a shift, she'd hug him a little tighter, knowing the dangers he faced. She'd pray he'd come home safe to her and their little girl, Emily. That's what it was like for all our families. We firefighters carried the weight of the job, but our wives and kids carried the worry. Now let me set the scene for that night. It was a typical June evening, the air thick with humidity, the kind of night where you'd sit on the porch with a glass of sweet tea. At Engine 11 station, just a mile from Savannah Highway, the crew was sitting down to dinner. Louis Mulkey was probably cracking a joke, making everybody laugh. Across town, Maggie was tucking Emily into bed, whispering a prayer for Brandon. Nobody knew that in a few minutes, everything would change. At 7 minutes past 7, the 911 call came in. A voice shouted through the line, panicked, saying there was a big fire behind a warehouse at 1807 Savannah Highway, the Sofa Superstore. Smoke was pouring out, they said, and it was getting worse fast. The dispatcher hit the alarm, and at Engine 11, the bell rang out. The boys dropped their forks, grabbed their gear, and piled into the truck. I wasn't on shift that night, but I can picture it clear as day, the red lights flashing, the siren wailing, the adrenaline pumping. They were at the scene by 10 past 7, just 3 minutes later. The Sofa Superstore was a sprawling place. 42,000 square feet of furniture showrooms and warehouses, sitting on nearly 2 acres. It was packed with sofas, mattresses, and cushions, all stuff that burns hot and fast. When Engine 11 pulled up, they saw thick black smoke billowing from the loading dock out back, where workers took their cigarette breaks. Nobody knew it yet, but that's where the fire started, likely from a tossed cigarette that caught some trash. The boys got to work right away, pulling hoses and attacking the fire from the outside. Assistant Fire Chief Larry Garvin was the highest-ranking officer on the scene. Larry was a good man, steady under pressure. He'd been to that store just a week before picking out furniture for a new fire station. He even led a walkthrough of the building in 2006, planning how we'd handle a fire there. But there was something he didn't account for: the steel truss system holding up the roof. Those trusses create hidden spaces where fires can spread unseen, and in the firefighting world, we call them widowmakers for a reason. Larry put on his gear and walked into the showroom with two other firefighters to check things out. Inside, it looked calm at first, no flames, just a faint haze of smoke. He figured the fire was contained to the loading dock. But then he opened the double doors to the warehouse, and all hell broke loose. The fire sucked in the fresh oxygen like a living thing, ripping the doors from his hands. Flames roared through the opening, spreading into the showroom. Larry tried to close the doors, but the pull was too strong. That was the moment things started to spiral. 4 minutes later, the crew from Ladder 5, including Michael French, went inside with hoses to fight the fire. Engines 16 and 19 followed, Brandon Thompson among them. They dragged hose lines through the showroom trying to push back the flames, but they hit trouble fast. The hoses we used back then were smaller than most departments, and the water pressure was weak. To make matters worse, the water lines ran across Savannah Highway, and cars kept driving over them, pinching the flow. Over the radio, you could hear the frustration, firefighters shouting for more pressure, but it wasn't coming. When Fire Chief Rusty Thomas arrived, he took command. Rusty was a seasoned chief respected by all of us. He wore his white chief's helmet and started directing trucks, coordinating water supply, and calling for backup. But our command system back then spread him thin. He was supposed to focus on fighting the fire, but he was juggling too many tasks. Inside the building, things were getting worse. The smoke was so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The furniture stacked high turned the showroom into a maze, and those hidden spaces in the roof, they were feeding the fire, letting it grow hotter and bigger. Now there was a young man inside that store, not a firefighter, but an employee named Jonathan Tyrrell. John was working in a small room off the warehouse when he heard the sirens. He opened the door to escape, but a wall of flames blocked his way, furniture burning like a tower. He was trapped. John tried calling 911, but his first call didn't go through. He tried his wife, same thing. By some miracle, his second 911 call connected, even though he'd never gotten cell service in that spot before. The operator patched him to a firefighter on the scene who told him to stay low, hug the floor, and wait. John was choking on smoke, banging on tables and walls, praying someone would hear him. He thought of his wife and daughter, wondering if he'd ever see them again. Back outside, the fire was raging. The boys inside were running low on air. Their breathing tanks only lasted about 20 minutes, and by 7:31, some had been in there for 18. Over the radio, you could hear the panic creeping in. One firefighter shouted he'd lost his hose line. That's a nightmare in a fire because the hose is your lifeline. Your way back to the truck in zero visibility. Then at 7:32, the worst call came. Mayday, a firefighter's cry for help. A voice crackled through, desperate, saying, "Car 1, please tell my wife I love you." Rusty ordered radio silence to reach the crew, but the voices kept coming, garbled, frantic. One man I'll never know who prayed aloud in Jesus' name, Amen. Those words hung in the air like a farewell. Rusty knew things were bad, but he didn't know who called Mayday or how many men were still inside. He ordered the front windows smashed to create escape routes and let rescuers in. But that was a mistake. The fresh air fed the fire, and within minutes a flashover hit. That's when everything combustible in a room ignites at once like a bomb. The flames burned white hot, and the heat was unbearable. At 7:38, Rusty shouted for everyone to evacuate, but it was too late for some. 7 minutes later, at 7:45, the roof came down. It was a thunderous crash like the earth itself was breaking. A wave of heat and ash swept over everyone outside, and flames shot 30 feet into the sky. The showroom was gone, and with it, 9 of our brothers. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later from friends who were. They said it was like watching a piece of Charleston die. Maggie Thompson got the call at home. A friend from the department showed up at her door, and she knew before he spoke. She held Emily tight, trying to explain why Daddy wasn't coming home. The fire was under control by 10 that night, but it wasn't until 4 in the morning that we brought out the last of our boys. Lewis Mulkey, Michael French, James Drayton, Bradford, Beatty Melvin, Champagne William Hutchinson, Mark Kelsey, Brandon Thompson, and Mike Benke. They were aged 27 to 56 with over 130 years of experience between them. They were husbands, fathers, coaches, veterans. They were our heroes. At least 9 other firefighters were injured, some barely escaping before the collapse. John Tyrrell was the last person pulled out alive, saved by the axe through the wall. He went home to his family, but he carried that night with him forever. Charleston was shattered. The news spread fast, and the grief was like a heavy fog over the city. 4 days later, we held the memorial service. Thousands came not just from Charleston, but from all over the world. Firefighters from New York, Chicago, London, even Australia stood shoulder to shoulder. A motorcade of over 300 fire trucks, ambulances, and command vehicles rolled through the city, passing the stations where our boys had served. President George W. Bush sent a message calling them heroes who showed great skill and courage. He said their legacy would inspire us all. I was there standing with my old crew, tears in my eyes. We saluted as the caskets passed, each one draped in the flag. I'll never forget Maggie at the service holding Emily's hand. She looked strong, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She told me later she wanted Emily to grow up knowing her daddy was a hero, that he gave everything to save others. That's what kept her going. The community rallied around the families, raising money, bringing meals, offering prayers. It showed what Charleston was made of, how we come together when it hurts the most. But we had questions, all of us. How did a fire that started in a dumpster turn into such a disaster? Why did we lose 9 men? The answers came in 2008 when reports from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and an independent panel hired by the city were released. They painted a tough picture. The Sofa Superstore was a fire trap. It had no sprinkler system, which could have stopped the fire early. The building had been expanded without permits, with wooden additions and sheet metal that trapped heat and smoke. The open floor plan and hidden spaces in the roof let the fire spread unchecked. And those cigarette breaks out back. They stored flammable stuff right by the smoking area, a recipe for disaster. The reports didn't spare the fire department either. We were understaffed with outdated equipment. Our hoses were too small, our water pressure too weak. We didn't have enough training for big fires like that, and our aggressive tactics put men in harm's way. The city hadn't done regular fire inspections, which would have caught the code violations. And when Rusty ordered those windows smashed, it fueled the flashover. The report said he had few options, though. Cutting a hole in the roof might have vented the smoke, but we didn't have the men or gear to do it safely. The coroner's report hit hard. We thought the roof collapse killed our boys, but they died from smoke inhalation and burns before it fell. They fought until their last breath trying to save each other. Rusty took it hardest of all. He told the panel he accepted responsibility, said he wished he could have done something different. He retired after the reports came out a broken man. In 2011, the state ruled no criminal charges would be filed. The issues were serious, but not criminal. The store settled with the families for $1.9 million, and other lawsuits brought in over $18 million. It was justice of a kind, but no money could bring our boys back. The Sofa Superstore was never rebuilt. The city bought the land and turned it into a memorial park with markers where each man fell. In 2022, a new fire station opened next door with 9 floor-to-ceiling windows, one for each of our brothers. Every morning at 9, a bell outside the station tolls 9 times a reminder of what we lost and what they gave. The department changed too. We got bigger hoses, thermal imaging cameras, larger oxygen tanks. Our uniforms were upgraded after the old ones melted in the heat. We built a fire marshal division to enforce codes and prevent fires. And across the country, cities tightened their rules, installing sprinklers, training firefighters better. Those changes have saved lives, and they're the legacy of our 9. I think about them every day. Louis with his big laugh, Mike with his dreams, Earl with his stories, Brandon who loved his little girl, Melvin Brad, William Mark, and Mike Benke, all of them. They weren't just firefighters. They were our brothers, our neighbors, our friends. Their sacrifice wasn't in vain. Because of them, we're safer now. Because of them, we remember what it means to serve. As I sit here years later, the memory of that June night still lingers like the echo of that bell tolling 9 times each morning at the Charleston fire station. Louis Mulkey, Michael French, James Drayton, and their 6 brothers didn't just fight a fire, they gave everything to protect our city. Their courage reminds us that heroes walk among us often unnoticed until the moment they're needed most. Their sacrifice pushed us to build a safer world, from stronger fire codes to better training. Saving lives will never count. So take a moment, hug your loved ones a little tighter, check your smoke alarms, share this story with your grandkids so they know what bravery looks like. The legacy of our 9 lives on in every heart they touched, in every life they saved, and in the unyielding spirit of Charleston. Let's honor them by living with the same courage, kindness, and love they showed us all. That's the story of June 18, 2007, the night Charleston lost 9 of its finest. They were heroes and their light still shines. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and God bless the firefighters who keep us safe every day.